Hello, everybody, and welcome to the JVology live show. I'm your host today, Krista Inakovsky, filling in for the vacationing Jay Facette. And we've got to keep the show rolling because we have a lot of great people to feature, and I've been really excited to get Michael Neeley on the show, especially right now. You've got a lot of big things going. How are you, Michael?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Good. Well, we've got a lot to cover, and we will definitely get to that. Just want to give everyone a welcome. If you are new or not quite familiar with JVology, we are your source for people, fun, and profits, where entrepreneurs, speakers, authors, coaches, small business owners come together to really leverage their influence with other business professionals to grow their impact, their influence, and of course their income, and doing it all through building great relationships, which is what we get to do today by featuring Michael. And gosh, we're going to be talking about podcasts. So whether you are thinking about a podcast, have your own, or just getting launched, Michael is the person to tell us all the goods on why we should be doing podcasts and really what the future is with it. So let me give us a little the official start to our show. Oh my gosh, things have moved around back here. Let's hope this is it. All right, we are on. So awesome. Michael Neeley is an authority strategist and business mentor, and now has a book, not just any book, but a top-selling, you have to give me the right title.
It's a bestseller, yeah.
A bestseller on Amazon, Zero to Launch podcast. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you for having me, Krista. I'm excited to share with your tribe here today at JVology. I'm excited about it.
Good. So give us a little bit of background. Obviously, podcasting is not your only thing. It's something that you've probably come into after years of being a business strategist. And I know you've been doing a lot of talk on authority. People know you're the person to come to. So let's start there. Tell us a bit.
Wow.
What does authority strategist look like?
Okay. Well, it's actually funny. I kind of stumbled onto it, really. The truth is, I used to be a professional actor. That was my first career for 20 years. And when I left that industry to raise my son up in Santa Cruz, California, I struggled for a while, and I was chasing the almighty dollar. I got into the high-tech industry. I was in pharmaceutical for a bit. And it was during this time in the high-tech where, I had a high-tech startup company, and we were hitting the end of our runway as far as finances goes. We couldn't find any more investment money to get put into it, and it just hadn't taken off yet. And so I was kind of struggling. But at the same time, I had started coaching people on the side because that was more of a passion of mine. And it was during one of these sessions that a client of mine was having these great breakthrough moments and some really cool ahas. And we decided to record the session. And when we played it back after, he said, "Dude, that sounds really great. You should start a podcast." And literally, this was 2014, Chris. I didn't know what a podcast was. I'd never listened to one in my life. I'm like, well, how does it even work? What's going on? 14 days later, I had my first show. Literally, It's that fast. Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
And this is, that's 6 years ago.
Yeah.
In the newer realm of podcasting.
Yeah.
It's a while.
It was pretty wild. And
what was the name of your show?
It's Consciously Speaking. I still have the same show. But what was interesting is when I launched it, I didn't know what I was doing, quite honestly. I mean, it's easy to get a podcast launched. I'll tell you that right out front. Anybody can launch a podcast. It's so easy. But I didn't know what I was doing strategically. And then I saw a webinar on podcasting, and I learned what a podcast could be. And I realized I was doing it all wrong. So that's when I shut the show down, and I relaunched it as a 7-day-a-week show. And so when you ask about authority building stuff, it just kind of took off for me at that point. And that's when I realized some things, because what happened was other podcasters who had 5 years of experience, I mean, they've been doing it far longer than me, were coming to me and asking questions. And I realized that I had learned some very interesting stuff because I went into it wholeheartedly. And I realized what they were doing wrong and what I was doing right with a lot of the stuff. And so I started to share that knowledge with them. And then my authority continued to grow. I did a virtual summit, which also grew my list massively. I then started getting invited to speak on people's stages and at their events and on other podcasts and platforms like this even. And then my first book got published. And so all of this started happening. And I realized there was a magic formula to the way that I had positioned things, quite by accident, by the way. It wasn't like I had some brilliant genius plot here. But in hindsight, I realized, there was a natural interweaving of these that made it easier and more powerful. And that's when I started teaching that to other people and developed what I have. My business is called the Authority Academy even. So
I think that really speaks volumes when you're doing it and then learning from your experience and seeing what works. It's one thing to sit back and go, let me try to get this all perfect before I jump in, but it doesn't work that way. So
right.
Jump in like you did, took action on the podcast, and then had the awareness to recognize what's working, what's not working, and then track that, right? That's part of it, is just really recognizing what it is and then going out and teaching it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think part of that could be because of all my background in business that I had leading into it. I had developed this acute awareness that you really need to be ready to pivot and adjust on the go. It's like you've probably heard the story before, like when a plane leaves Los Angeles heading for New York City, they're off course 90% of the time. Like first off, they take off heading out over the ocean before they turn around and start heading towards New York. And then maybe they have to avoid a weather pattern. And so they're off course. Then maybe they have to avoid air traffic and they're off course again. But the point is because they know where their destination is, they can continually pivot until they get there. And so fortunately, I applied a lot of that.
That makes a lot of sense. It is having the long game in mind and not getting too thrown off when things aren't going exactly what it seems like it's in the right direction, but just trusting that it's part of the process, that you've got to get off the runway first before you can turn and reroute.
Exactly. Yeah.
And avoiding some bad weather, as I have outside my window right now.
Yeah. That sounds pretty freaky there. Hopefully that we won't get anything that disturbs the electronic connection here.
Yeah, I hope so. So when you talk about authority, is that really rooted in the authority that comes from podcasting, or do you branch out and look at authority in other ways?
Well, I look at authority in lots of ways. And first of all, I just always like to point this out to people that you may notice that in the word authority is the word author. And so most of us have heard the expression, so-and-so wrote the book on that topic, or whatever it is. And so that's what it all really boils down to, is who is that author, the authority of a particular topic. And in order to go from being, what I work with my clients on, is that you may be a best kept secret. You may be really good at what you do, but only a small little crowd knows you. So how do you take that and translate it onto the bigger screen? How do you elevate that to where you become the go-to expert and the real authority on it? And podcasting is certainly one way of doing it, because in all honesty, you're still an author, but it's the spoken word. Yeah. And so, it all grows and stems from that. And it's just one of the many ways. I definitely recommend getting a book published as well. So they all play together.
Which you've done.
Yeah, twice now.
Yeah, and from what I hear, it came through organically. You realized, wow, I've got all this material, and let's just bring it all together in a book. So where did it come from? Where were you gathering these?
Yeah, again, it's funny. Sometimes I stumble on the stuff kind of accidentally, really. I had not set out to write my latest book, which is called the Zero to Launch Podcast Accelerator. This is the bestseller you were mentioning. I had not set out to write that. What I had set out to do was to rewrite my online course. So my online course, which used to be called Zero to Launch in 14 Days, named after the fact I launched my first show in 14 days, I realized that so much has changed in the podcasting industry just in the last 6 to 12 months. I mean, it is really hitting this boom right now. And because of all those changes, which are really big ones, I looked at my course and thought, I need to rewrite this thing to keep up with what's happening in the industry. And so I went step by step. And not only did I rewrite it, I made it 3 times as big as well, because I wanted to flesh it out even more with all of the new stuff I had learned. And so I scripted all of these different videos that are in my course. And when I put all these scripts together, it was like 58,000 words. I'm like, that's a book right there. And so then I went back through and I remassaged all of it to take away the reference to, being on camera, because it's made to, for training videos. And I fleshed it out a little bit differently, and boom, there was my book. And so I got together with my publisher and, I said, can we have this out pretty quickly? Because I'm also relaunching the course. I'd love to have those coincide. And we made it happen. And boom, I hit Amazon bestseller on day one right out of the gate. So that was exciting.
That's amazing. I just posted or had Jay post in the comments the name of the book, Zero to Launch Podcast Accelerator. And
Awesome.
Then it hit number 1 in public relations, number 3 in customer relations, and number 6 in business leadership training.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. And I do have more questions, but I want to just pause for a second. If anyone's watching this on one of our shared platforms, if you'll do me a quick favor, right above the video, you'll see Jay Passette's name. Click on his name, and that'll take you to where we're broadcasting this live right now. And then when you comment in the comments, we can bring them right on the screen like this. So if you have any questions for Michael or just want to say hello, take that one extra step, and then we can engage with you there. So thanks, April, for watching. Yeah, great.
And I'd love to just talk briefly about that quote that she's referencing there. It is truly one of the reasons that I think podcasting is so vital. It's because, as the hockey great Wayne Gretzky attributed his success to, was skating to where the puck is going to be. Podcasting is where the puck is going to be. I mean, right now, there's a lot of people getting all excited about video and YouTube and Facebook Lives and everything. And those are great. But the truth is, if you look at what's happening in the industry and you follow it, podcasting is where the puck is going to be. And it's where the action is shifting to. And here's why, I think, Krista, is because we're a time crunch society. And we're trying to get in as much as we can in the little time that we have available for stuff. And so on a commute, someone may listen to a podcast while they're driving, or while they're working out at the gym, or while they're on their jog, because you can multitask and do that, as opposed to trying to watch a video or to read a blog or anything. So that's also why podcasting is really, just stepping up. And Spotify put a whole bunch of money into it. Pandora came on board. Amazon Music just added podcasts, and Audible. All of it's happening right now.
Great. That was going to be my question coming back to you, is what is that big difference that you've seen? But let's go ahead and take April's other question. Can you read that from where you are?
Yeah. So what makes podcasts different? Some people do listen to podcasts via live stream, like April is talking about. And my son, as an example, he's 17 years old now, and he listens to podcasts through YouTube. But he'll just listen to them audibly. So he's not really looking at them. And I'm not saying that can't work. But the truth is that in the podcasting space, when it's published with the idea of audibly being heard, you're now on a different platform for people to find it. And more people are searching those platforms, which include Apple, Spotify, Google Music, or Google Podcasts, all these different elements. So that's part of what makes it a little bit of a shift as well. It's you're in different libraries than you would be, let's say, in YouTube.
And so nowadays there are more libraries to be a part of.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there've even been tests done, by the way. So you can have a video podcast in Apple Podcasts. They do have the video platform, but podcast professionals have tested it time and again, where they'll go, okay, I'm going to take my show, I'm going to do an audio only version of it, and I'm going to do a video version of it. And I'm going to release them both and see what does the best. And the audio only versions have been outperforming, at least in this environment, like 95-5. Okay, wow. So only 5% are really choosing to watch the video version. And again, it's because if they're having a choice and they're not going to watch the video anyway, a lot of them are going, hey, yeah, this is great. It downloads right to my phone. It takes less bandwidth than video does.
Right.
Okay, so when you consider all these other elements, it's why it's a very popular medium right now and growing.
All right. So how many episodes have you done on your podcast?
Oh, my goodness. On my main show, Consciously Speaking, I think we just released episode 436. And then I have my other shows, which have varying releases from anywhere from 30 to 40 episodes to some as few as like 10 episodes. My shows are all over the map with different release schedules and looks and everything. So,
Okay.
but all in all, 500 probably.
That's amazing. And do you do majority of interview style, or do you do teaching or talking just on your own, or combination?
I do. The majority is probably interview style, but I do a lot of solo episodes as well. And a couple interesting facts about that, by the way. One is that a lot of my solo shows outperform the interviews. And the reason I think behind that is that when I do a solo show, it tends to be a teaching opportunity where I'm diving into some subject matter as, giving it kind of like a lesson. And I think people are into that. That's what they're looking to get. And sometimes interviews can be more about a person's story and their history and all this. And while those are super interesting, people are really looking for what's my big takeaway here. And that's where I think solo shows can do really well. So if someone's thinking of doing a podcast like that, you can really put out some great stuff and get it found and heard, and people fall in love with it.
All right. That's great. Let's talk about length of the podcast. Is there a number? Do you fluctuate?
I've reduced mine. Yeah. You know what's interesting? There is actually some proof in the industry that says longer form actually does pretty well. So shows that are like 45 to 60 minutes do really well. One of the most downloaded episodes in podcasting was 5 hours long on hardcore history. So, there's that, but really I think what you decide on for your length has to be what you feel comfortable doing, because the longer your show, the more it's going to take an effort to produce that. And I do know quite successful podcasters who do daily shows that are only like 5 minutes each. So when you think about that, one recording session, you can knock out your entire week. So
just do them back to back and then
and then release them on a daily basis.
On a daily basis. All right. So who's your most interesting guest? Do you have a favorite episode you've done?
It's so funny. I've been asked this several times in the last month, and I just like all my guests so much. Probably the ones that stand out the most are the bad ones, quite honestly, because most of my guests are just so good.
Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this thing?
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you what's one thing to not do if someone's considering being a guest on a podcast. To what makes a bad guest is someone who goes on and they have a predetermined idea of everything they want to say. And no matter what your question is, they're going to go off on their answer the way they had wanted to. And for me as a podcast host, those episodes sometimes never make it to the air. And so just be sure that, flow with the podcast host, because they know their audience and they know where they want to take the conversation, as opposed to you, especially because a lot of people, they go, oh, I know I want to say the same thing that I say in every podcast interview I do. Well, you know what, as a podcaster, that makes my show boring because people probably already heard you say that 20 times. I want to get into stuff you haven't talked about.
Exactly.
So, go with the flow.
And I'll just kind of put my 2 cents in as someone who does a whole lot of these interviews. It's when people talk nonstop without a breath, for me to ask another question. And then it becomes into a giant monologue, and I'm not one really to interrupt someone. But, like you're saying, don't have too much of an agenda, and then answer the question and pause and I think it's more fun when there's interaction. But I'm sure you've had guests that just like go and go and go without even a breath for you to shift direction at all.
Yeah, one of my worst ones was that case where literally the guy took 18 minutes to answer one question. Literally. And
we're done. Nice having you.
Exactly. So Krista, for you, when you have somebody and you're interviewing them, do you find it appealing when maybe they ask you a question as well?
I do, actually.
Yeah.
It's good to keep a little bit of balance in there.
Yeah.
It kind of shifts the dynamic. I like how you did that, Michael. Well done.
Thank you. Well, and the truth is too, it's like it's your show, so the people who are tuning into it, sure, they're interested in your guest, but they keep coming back because the guest always changes. The common denominator is the host.
Yes.
So they love to hear what you're laying down as well. So
yes, I actually see what April just wrote. I refer to these interviews as the interview because it's, yeah.
Did you steal that from me, April? Because I've been using that for years now. I actually do call it that in my trainings. I said, do you want to do interviews or interviews? Great minds think alike.
Yes, let's see one more. Best podcast for me are the ones that are free flowing and conversational. Exactly. That's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Keeps it a little more interesting, headed back and forth.
Yeah, I used to when I first, and this, by the way, is part of your podcast journey as you learn and go with the flow. When I first launched Consciously Speaking, I had a list of set questions. And over time, I started getting feedback from listeners. They were saying, for one, they wanted to hear more of me, my thoughts on it. And the other was they wanted the conversation to branch off where it would go naturally. And so I threw out all the questions. And now when people come on the show, a lot of times they'll even write and ask, can you send me some questions? And I'm like, no, because I don't know what they are. So we just start a conversation and we see where it takes us.
It keeps people on their toes too, hopefully avoiding some of those preset answers that they're
right.
have rehearsed in the mirror time and again. Like, no, let's just talk about something different.
Exactly.
All right, so we've had quite a few, actually over 30 JVology members launch a podcast within the last 6 months, which is awesome. And so I have a couple of questions around that. One, what's kind of that most important thing when you're launching? You commit to a name, a look, a theme. I mean, once you get that out there, is there much wiggle room if you feel like it's not landing, or is that like super important to nail?
It's not super important to nail in the respect that it is not set in stone. I even tell my clients, and because partially, by the way, this is what stops people. They're going, I can't launch. I don't quite know what my title's going to be, or I don't quite have my artwork right. So what? You can change your title every day of the week if you want to. You can change your artwork every day of the week. Don't, but you could.
Don't.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So what I tell people that's the most important thing to start with is to reverse engineer your show. And what I mean by that, Krista, is start with, again, it's like that airplane leaving Los Angeles for New York. Know where your destination is. Start with that in the pre-planning before you even take off. And so by that, I mean, think ahead like, okay, how am I going to make money with my show? And if you think, I want to sell my own coaching packages or my own online course or my book or whatever, okay, great. So now you know what it is you have to sell. Now, the next step would be, who buys that? Who is my ideal buyer? And kind of try to dial that in as best as you can. Once you have that, now go, okay, great. Where do those people hang out? How can I create a show that is going to appeal to that audience? And the truth is, sometimes you may create a show that you have zero expertise in. And which I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but let me give you an example. One of my shows called Buy This, Not That, which I've had Jay on as well, it's called the subtitle is The Entrepreneurial Tool Review. All I do in that show is I review software and training programs that entrepreneurs need. I don't have to be an expert in all of them or any of them really, but I know that the people who are going to tune into that show are my ideal clients. Entrepreneurs, coaches, authors, speakers, holistic practitioners. They're the ones who are going to tune in there to listen. And so now they're getting to know me, like me, trust me. They're checking out my stuff, and I can put out an offer then that would be appealing to them. So that's the important thing, is reverse engineer and start there.
I love that. I think that's a fantastic idea. And then what about having more than one podcast like you do? It's all about just creating one conversation and then having another conversation. So you're not mixing audiences or conversations, or what's kind of the big strategy behind that?
Well, yeah, it's such an interesting
More the
question.
merrier.
Well, there's multiple levels of this. So let me just share. First level is the other thing that I really try to get people to start to think of, because so many people go into podcasting and they think, oh, this is cool. It's going to be fun. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. It can help my business. And that's all great. But how about you start to think of yourself as a media company? All right. Now, as a media company, when let's say Fox or the WB or some other network, CBS, NBC, when they put out a new season of shows, they're kind of like throwing spaghetti against the wall. They're going to put out these new shows and they're going to see which one takes off.
Yeah.
And some are going to fail and they get canceled. And some are going to be a hit and start making them a lot of money. And they replace the ones that get canceled with the next season. All right. So new shows. So I think for one, it's important to maybe look at your podcasting that way. What other shows can I create that might even take off better than that first one that I started? And that's part of it. So the other part is there are 7 ways to monetize a podcast. I teach these as well. And one of them, pardon?
Is that in the book or in your coaching?
It's in the book and in my training program as well. As a matter of fact, you're going to talk about in a little while. I think as we mentioned in the green room chat about a free offer, I'll even include some training in that.
Oh, fantastic. I'll pull that link up while you're telling us about what we need to know here.
Yeah. And so one of my shows is employing one of those special tactics of monetization, which I call write-offs and freebies. And that's my show, Something to Whine About. I just happen to really love wine. Another commonality Jay and I have that we share. And for that show, because I am a wine industry professional now, when I go to wine country, whether it's Napa, Sonoma, Paso Robles, anywhere where there's a wine country, typical industry standard procedure there is that if you're in the industry, you taste for free and you get a 30% discount on wines that you purchase at the winery.
For that? Do you flash a badge?
Well, it used to be if you would have a business card, like let's say you work at another winery, you can use your business card.
Okay.
But for mine, I have cards for my podcast, and I just flip up say, here's my podcast. We host a show, and often we'll bring the microphones in there. We'll interview them right on spot. But we're tasting for free, and we're getting these great discounts on wine. And to me,
you got that one right. That was beautiful strategy right there.
Saves thousands, I tell you. At least as much wine as I like to drink. The other thing that is really cool and a similar thing is, so for my show, Consciously Speaking, I was invited to Rhythmia Life Advancement Center down in Costa Rica to go there and interview their founders, because what they're teaching there was very suited for my podcast. And so it was an all expense paid trip, over $6,000 in value, to go down there for this lovely retreat center for a week and just to interview their founders. So
what I'm hearing is align a podcast with what you love to do.
That's for sure.
So it could be travel, wine, interesting cars.
Yeah. Like if you have a particular hobby like that, then yes. So we both know Doug Sandler, and one of his shows is Ford Mustang, the early years. So, he could really take advantage of some of the specials with that, and tax write-offs. Again, I'm not an accountant, but I have played one on TV, but you really do need to, check with your accountant. But a lot of this can also be written off. And that's just one of 7 ways to monetize a show. So mine are all monetized differently. That's part of the other strategy behind it.
Interesting. I like that. I think it's really, really important for people to take the time and learn from someone just like you about what the different monetization strategies and options are, and decide, at least going in, what that long view is and which strategy is going to work for which podcast. Instead of just going, I'm going to make a podcast and start one and not really knowing why, or people will love it and then I'll earn money. There's a little more to it than that.
Yeah. Sadly, that's one of the biggest mistakes that people do make, is they think, I'm just going to draw this great audience and then I'm going to get all these sponsors throwing their money at me. And it's just not the way that it works. And there's actually a term in the industry that's been coined. It's called pod fading. And that's because most podcasts, literally, I've heard numbers everywhere from 70% to 93% of podcasts do not make it past 7 episodes.
7? That's it?
Yeah. Yep.
Wow, that's not even giving it a good shot.
I know.
It's called unrealistic expectations if you're expecting big results after 7 episodes.
Yeah. Well, and I think they came in confused. They came in thinking, oh, it's going to be just hot right out of the gate, and I'm going to have all these listeners. And then the other piece they don't understand is like number of downloads. Like literally, this is a sobering stat for people. If your episode gets 139 downloads, okay, get that over, you're better than 50% of the podcasts out there. 50% of podcasts barely get 139 episodes. So let that sink in a little bit.
Yeah.
Just to get up to 1,000 episodes, when you hit around 1,100, you're better than 80% of podcasts.
We're talking about downloads or viewers?
Downloads, okay, which is kind of like listeners. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 1,100 downloads, and you're better than 80% of podcasts out there. So keeping that in mind, I'm not saying it's easy to draw a crowd by any means. There are techniques to do that, and I actually teach a lot of those as well. I actually have a training coming up that I think we're going to offer today for 10 audience growth hacks and authority building tactics that really work. And so these are ways to grow that audience, because that's the other thing. People start and they just don't know how to grow an audience. And so 7 episodes in, they're going, nobody's watching my show, shut it down.
Exactly. It's so much more than getting the mic, having a great name, and interviewing people, because if it's sitting there with nobody listening, then you don't really have a show. And just because it's on iTunes doesn't mean that you have listeners.
Right.
So there's a lot of components to this, which is why everybody needs to go and buy Michael Neeley's book, Zero to Launch Podcast.
99 cents still, so get it while it's hot.
Now, I did drop the link in the chat so people can click on it. Tell us what they're getting here, Michael.
Yeah, so for this right now, I put together a series of video trainings, and this offer that you have here is for the first in the series of video trainings. And we're going to start out with these 10 audience growth hacks that I've developed. And quite honestly, I'll just give you a little teaser here. I throw in an 11th one, which has been called brilliant by people who've heard it from me, and not my own words. So, but I'd love to hear people's feedback on that one. But it's a really cool secret little tactic that works to grow your audience. So they're going to get this video training and a downloadable piece that gives you these 10 audience growth hacks. So, and by the way, a lot of these can be applied to your Facebook Live, to your YouTube. You know, they're cross-platform, if you will. And this is the first of 3 video trainings and then a webinar. The second video training, I'm going to cover 7 ways to monetize your podcast. So that's in there too.
Okay. 7 ways to monetize your podcast. At least nail one of them. There's 7 options. Make sure you get one of them working really well. Go for the longevity of it all.
Yeah. Well, and Krista, if you don't mind, I'll just take a moment to also enlighten people on this aspect. There was a survey done recently that measured of the podcasts that actually are monetizing, because not all of them do, but of the ones that are monetizing, 62% of those are making the money by selling their own goods and services. So keep that in mind too. And that's also why I say reverse engineer. What do you want to sell? Keep that in mind before you even start.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael, so much for all of these fascinating podcast tips. More than just tips. I mean, whether you are looking to start a podcast or you're already have launched one, talk to Michael, take this free training, buy the book that's on Amazon, and see how you can continue to grow, to gain an audience. Perhaps there's a way of monetizing you haven't thought of yet or you haven't mastered yet. So dive in and learn from the best. What else would you like to share with us today before we go?
I think those are some of the key elements that are important. Just maybe one final thing is to say this, is that when I created my first show, Consciously Speaking, my goal with that show was to wake the planet up one person at a time. It's about being more mindful and more conscious as humans being on this planet. And as I grew that show, I also realized I'm just one person and trying to make my little mark in the space. But as other podcasters started coming to me and potential podcasters, I realized, oh, you know what? I can amplify that by helping others to get their message out to the world. And so I become like a messenger of messengers. And that is my goal, is that I think too many graveyards are filled with people who went to their coffins with their stories left untold and their gifts left unshared. And I want to stop that. I want to help people to get their message out there. So that's what I'm up to. And I'm happy to help anybody along that path.
Well, I love that. I thank you for sharing what's in your heart and your reason behind doing what you do. And it is about getting however many tens, hundreds, thousands of people with their voices. And for every great podcast, that opens the door to amazing guests and amazing stories and inspiration and tips and strategies, whether it's for business or how to plant properly, if that's what
Yeah.
your thing is, right? Or where to get the best wine. So if anyone out there is inspired to share, to start a podcast on something that they love to do. And I like the idea that it doesn't have to be necessarily exactly your business, but I'm sure you can share strategies on how people can monetize something that's a passion and a hobby and can grow that into something as well. So
Yeah.
super fun stuff. Great seeing you again, Michael.
You too, Krista. Thank you for having me here today.
Absolutely. My pleasure. And we'll see you around JVology real soon.
All right. Ciao.